Well, first of all, good morning, everybody, and thanks for reading the book. Here's the thing about motivating people to change. Whenever big idea like I do about environment and wanting people to hold the same point of view, what we forget is that people have concerns of their own, and that their concerns oftentimes are no less important than ours. Like, for example, there are people out there campaigning for orphans or, starving children or people without water, and people just doing a good job getting around feeding their families and so sometimes I know my tendency will be to go at people as though I am the ethical, moral person and I just have to convince everybody else to be ethical and moral. And that's not a good place to come from because because it just makes people angry. And so the first thing I think that's important is to understand where other people are at. What are their concerns? So there's this story that I love about during the 60s. This is a story about a peace activist. And this peace activist got on an airplane, and he sat down, next to somebody, and they got talking, and his fellow passenger said to him, what do you do? And he said, I'm a peace activist. I'm trying to stop the war in Vietnam. And his fellow passenger said, his fellow passenger said, it's a terrible war, but I think it's necessary. And, the peace activist was like, well, what do you do? And he says, I'm a dairy farmer. And he's like, well, Mr. Dairy Farmer, don't you know that every day soldiers are getting killed? And the dairy farmer's like, yeah, I know, but, it's a terrible thing, and I feel really sad about it, but it's a necessary war. And the peace activist is like, but do you not understand, even children are dying? And the dairy farmer's like, I do know that, and I was just crying about that the other day, but I still think it's a necessary war. And the peace activists are dropping napalm on the forest, and the forests are burning down, and the dairy farmer's like, I know it's awful, but sooner or later the war will come to an end, and it will be a good thing when we've won, because it's a necessary war. Finally, the peace activist says to the dairy farmer, he says, even the cows are dying. And the dairy farmer says, they're killing the cows? And the point is that, the way to change people's minds is to figure out what they're concerned about. So for example, here in the United States, a lot of people don't, it's only in the United States, by the way, but here in the United States, there's a debate over whether there's man-made climate change. And it turns out that debate has largely split across liberal conservative lines, which is sad because saving the planet is not a liberal or a conservative priority. It's a human priority. But anyway, so it turns out that the people who don't believe in climate change, we can try and bang them over the head about climate change, or we can meet them where they are and figure out what they're, they're the dairy farmer. So what is their cow, as it were? Where are the cows that they care about? And those cows, when it comes to conservatives, oftentimes tend to be national security and economics. So in terms of national security, we don't have to convince anybody that there's climate change for it to make sense for us to have a renewable energy system. Because if we have a renewable energy system, then we won't have to go to war to fight for oil. That's one thing. And second of all, if we have a renewable energy system and a renewable energy industry where we can sell renewable, solar and wind power around the world to other countries, then we get the jobs. So sometimes the idea is you don't necessarily try to force your own ideas down someone's throat. You figure out what their ideas are and how what you care about and they care about come together. No Impact Year was deliberately a learning year, so it was never like I didn't start out as an expert, trying to employ my expertise. I started out as a regular person, just trying to act in line with my values and do what I cared about. So, the fact that there were times where we kind of stumbled or found things that we, couldn't or wouldn't do, or made mistakes, that was all part of the learning process. When I, for example, I got invited on Good Morning America, I remember Diane Sawyer said, could you do it? And the audience, to the audience was like, no. And I said, well, the important thing is not that you do what I do. It's just that, you do your own little bit. And actually, why I said it like that, like, oh, you don't have to do what I do, you just have to do your own little bit. The reason why I said it like that was because I still didn't have the confidence in my message. And my message is, actually, my message now that I have the confidence to be able to stand up and say it is, you know what, we have a lot of emergencies as a society. We have 2 wars going on. We have an environmental emergency. We have an economic emergency. There's a lot of problems, and actually, we can't afford for all of us just to do a little bit. I don't think. I think that we're this is kind of like, I hesitate to use the analogy because I don't, this is not, we're not looking for more war, but to use the analogy with World War II, this is a time where the whole culture needs to be involved in finding a solution. It doesn't mean that everybody has to live like No Impact Man. It means that everybody needs to be involved and find their way of contributing, and I think a major way. I don't think that we can, forget about the problems that we have. I think we all have to be figuring it out because it's a distributed problem. The problem comes from so many places that the solution is going to have to come from so many places too. And so the one thing that I would have done differently is I would have been less meek at that time. I've been, a lot stronger in my message now. That's the one thing. That's the thing I would have done differently. The one thing that I want to say is that all of you, all of us, I think, in our hearts have good ideas for this world. Like, we have some idea of how we can help the world, but we start to think to ourselves, oh, I'm not going to, we're not going to do it because if it was a good idea, somebody else would do it, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not good enough. But truthfully, actually, if we just try one step at a time moving forward, we can make